You're ready to go. Right? Control L.
This is working.
I don't know why actually it stays like this.
There's nothing.
Welcome. It is my.
Yeah, on put
Hello?
it on. Yeah,
Yes.
now it's good. Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. It is my great pleasure to introduce Andrea Macrina from University College London, who will give the 20 minutes academic talk before the next panel. Welcome, Andrea.
And thank you very
No
much.
further congrats.
Thank you very much, Karina. Thank you very much, Eunice. Thank you very much, Craig, for this opportunity to speak to this very diverse audience. And perhaps, of course, I'm not used to do this kind of talk because I like visual mathematics, and that gives me the comfort. Anyway, so the title, you see, it's already maybe a little bit provocative for this audience, and in general, in fact, even when I speak to banks and various other stakeholders. But what I'm going to tell you about today in the next 15 minutes is a part of a bigger program and goal, which is the championing of this new domain, financial mathematics, that I call mathematical climate finance. Now, climate finance, of course, is big, it's huge. To keep up with everything that is being written and discussed, it's a real challenge itself.
They cannot
That's okay. Oh, thanks. Picking up.
Online.
So then what? Should I use one of
You
you?
can still use this, but this is supposed to be working on it. Can you?
Do I prefer that?
They can.
Can they hear me now?
Yes.
Online as well? Okay, I'll try to have this beautiful gelato here and imagine that it's vanilla and chocolate and so on. Yeah, so I was saying that this is an effort to develop and establish mathematical climate finance as its own discipline in financial mathematics. And the title is questioning the label, one of the labels that Craig already mentioned in his very interesting introduction, which is ESG, environmental, social, or societal, and governance, which is the label that is used, attributed, sought after by investors, by financiers, by project designers to show that whatever is going to be financed deserves this label and is sustainable across all three or one of them. Now, I will focus just on the E of ESG, not because E, S, and G are not important, but because it is my view, along with my co-authors, that if we don't get right the E, if we don't know how to properly use the E, define it, quantify it, measure it, then how can we possibly be confident that we're going to be doing a better job when it comes to society and governance, which already, as mentioned in the introduction today, are even harder to measure. So I propose that we consider for at least this 15 minutes, this other acronym, CEP, which is the carbon equivalence principle that we've come up with. And I'll mention all of them at the end when I'll show you the reference list. But it's my co-authors and me. There we go. So we've heard about the value of education. We've noticed at UCL that climate finance is, or the climate is not even clear. I mean, our students, when you ask them to read any graphs from published by the IPCC, they will struggle. They will not even know what is actually shown. CO2 with the concentration, what is the unit, and so on and so on. So we thought that we need to make an effort and bring on the mathematical part, the statistical part that should support climate finance. So we designed this new module for the financial mathematics MSc program that will launch this September called Mathematical Climate Finance. In research, there are just a few things that are exciting, but the goal here is to really account for carbon emissions and sequestrations in financial markets without having to rely on ESG labels or the green label. And by extension, of course, then in economies. Now, we've heard about microfinance. I'm going to come from the other extreme, so whole financial markets. But my question to Karen and Puhor was, of course, aiming at understanding whether microfinance can be understood in isolation. And I don't think it is in isolation because, of course, when you aggregate, when you create these credit unions, they will exist in the bigger financial market via their own stakeholders and points of contact, which are then the bigger banks. So we introduced the carbon equivalence principle that has as its purpose the alignment of incentives and the drive to behavioral change, as mentioned also here on the panel and highlighted by Yusra, so that when a financial investment is made, when a financial product is constructed, it does actually incorporate the incentives to decarbonize. And I'm going to skip the second last, because there's going to be a lot of probability in the background that I'm just not going to show. But I want to make clear that when finance speaks of climate risk, they consider physical risk, and they consider what is called transition risk, which means the policies that should lead a financial market, an economy, a whole society on a decarbonizing path, hopefully reaching net zero by 2050. And with that, of course, all sorts of risks emerge. And this is what I will focus on here. And in particular, the question will be how to incorporate emissions, absorption, which is equally important. And this is where I'm going to introduce the word carbon flow. So carbon flow here, and it's fantastic that I am in a department of chemistry, because I can actually show you the C, which is carbon, CO2, C and O, which is the CO2, and Y equivalent, because of course, greenhouse gases are not only CO2, but you have CO, monoxide. But of course, when you bring the H on board, you're going to have CH4, which is methane. But luckily, the scientists have worked out how to compare methane and the CO2 and make sure that they're all accounted for in terms of impact and greenhouse impact on global warming. So fantastic, I've got the periodic system. This is the first time I could do this. So no mathematics, so what could I show you? In 1966, a movie that came out in 1966 called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Now the three, you can't see them here. So this guy is supposed to be the good one, Clint Eastwood. This one is supposed to be the bad one, Lee Van Cleef, and the ugly one, I'm afraid, is in this movie, Eli Wallach, who died a few years ago. So why the good, the bad, and the ugly? Because I want you to take with you this slide, in fact. So I've got the CEP, the green, and the ESG, and underneath I ask the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now there is, of course, the attempt here to create immediate unconscious bias because I ordered the CEP, green, and ESG exactly as good, bad, and ugly are ordered, which of course tells you that I regard CEP as the good one, green as the bad one, and ESG as the ugly one. But why? So this talk is about emissions, and we've got scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 is when you burn something, then that's what you produce, those emissions that come out when you burn something. Scope 2 is when your delivery driver brings you your food home, and of course the delivery driver is burning, if she doesn't come with an electric vehicle, fuel. So your delivery, the food that arrives on your table will have caused scope 2 emissions. But what really matters for financial markets and banking is scope 3. Because if you think of a bank, then they'll tell you that apart from burning a little bit to heat and cool, they don't really have lots of emissions. And our point is, no, that's not true. There is a lot of scope 3 emissions, all the direct emissions that are actually enabled and caused by the financial products, think of a loan. So we make we produce this manifesto, where we bring closer the notion of a carbon equivalence principle. Now, what is that? The carbon equivalent emissions, so the CO, the CO2, the CHF, the CH4, and so on and so on. The carbon equivalent emissions and carbon equivalent sequestration, so both what goes into the atmosphere and what is absorbed from the atmosphere, enabled or caused by a financial product shall be linked to the financial product itself. Enabled means that the financial product makes the carbon flows possible. Okay, so that's the financing of the carbon flow. Cost means that the actual financial product causes directly carbon emissions. Think of Bitcoin, depending on how the electricity will have been produced to that Bitcoin and the life cycle of Bitcoin or any digital currency will be responsible for at least scope 2 emissions, which comes in the form of the electricity and what has been used to produce that electricity. Has coal been burned or is it wind power? So every financial product, with no exception, this is very important, shall account for the carbon flows that it enables or causes. Now, how is this achieved? Any financial product is defined. There are lawyers who do that. And there are quantities. And what is most important is to keep track of the cash flow. Every financial product is defined by when is paid what, when is paid back, and so on and so on. So all the cash movements that a financial product entails. That defines the financial product, and the name for what keeps track of all the cash movements is the cash flow term sheet. Now, what we are saying is that that's not sufficient for a definition of a financial product, whatever it might be. We can start with a simple loan, a simple mortgage. It should not only take care of the cash flows in its definition, but it should also take care of all the carbon flows. And so 2 term sheets will be required for the definition of a financial instrument, the cash flow term sheet and the carbon flow term sheet. This is very important because this is exactly how you link any financial transaction to the enabled or caused carbon flows. If you do that, then you don't need to introduce an ESG to declare whether a financial product or a book on a bank, a trading book or a bank book, or an asset manager, how responsible they are or how much carbon flow is actually on their books. It will be treated in exactly the same way as every other cash flow will be. So if you do that, you no longer need the green label. So the green one. Why is green not good? Because if I ask you how sustainable, how environmentally friendly your dam is that has been built or your power plant is, then we're going to have a discussion. We're going to be using some metric. I don't even want to use the word metric, some scoring. And then we're going to be declaring, okay, you're green and we're not green. Then, of course, you say, well, but maybe I am dark green or I'm light green. And then maybe I'm brown, maybe I'm blue, and maybe I am any color of the rainbow we like. And now as a mathematician say, why? Why do we do this? What we want to measure is something that is very clearly measurable. Is how much emission, how much CO2 equivalent is absorbed or emitted through the inaction of this financial instrument. This can be measured. Okay? So all we need to do is to include in the definition of the financial product exactly that quantity. Then, if you ask me how environmentally friendly it is, then I'm going to be looking at the project. I'm going to say this much goes into the atmosphere, this much is going to be absorbed. So absorption is then a negative quantity, a negative number, right? Emission is 5 tons of CO2 equivalent emitted over 1 year. 2 tons that are absorbed because I have a beautiful forest that I am in charge of and I manage properly, well, those 2 tons will be just minus tons. But what is minus green? I have no idea. What is minus brown? What is negative blue? I have no idea. So if we leave the green label aside and become more quantitative and really focus on the data that we have, as Corina has made clear to the ILO, on her sabbatical. Well, the good news is that there is data, there is useful data. We look at carbon emissions, highly precise data, whole satellites going around our globe to measure that. And it's publicly available. So we can just use it. So no green label. So this is where now we go back to the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you see that all the questions we have asked in relation to deciding whether the CEP or ESG or the green label are good or bad, of course, it looks great. The CEP is always a yes, right? It's confirming the test. It's succeeding. Of course, there is bias here again because we chose the questions, but this is an invitation to you. Ask yourself whatever question you want, and you ask yourself, is this supported by the green label? Is this supported by ESG? Is this supported by CEP? And if you find one where the CEP does not do a good job, but any other does, then please let me know. So our conclusion is that the good, the bad, and the ugly here is very clear. Which one is ugly and which one is bad. So if you apply the CEP in our work, we've shown that you can actually achieve a redesign and a reanalysis of financial products where the incentives become very clear. And I want to show you one study, which is project finance. And project finance in this example here is the construction of a power plant. And for each type of power plant you can have nowadays, so there is a very good understanding per type, per amount of energy, per amount of electricity that it can produce, how much CO2 equivalent will be emitted at the level of construction, on the period of construction, throughout its lifetime, the 35, 40 years that it produces electricity, and what will be emitted when deconstructing, decommissioning it, and hopefully returning the land to its original state. So we use all this data here, and then we ask, okay, now we know what the emissions are, but how do we come up with a price for these emissions? And we don't need the prices of yesteryear or yesterdecade, because we don't have those carbon prices. We need to have the carbon prices that will have to be enforced over the next 25 years to reach net zero. And the Network for Greening the Financial System has done this job where it gives us the carbon price scenarios that correspond to each decarbonization scenarios, those which will lead to net zero, those which will not, depending on which category you want to consider. So the prices per ton carbon are the ones that you see on your right-hand side. So we've taken those scenarios, those price scenarios, we multiplied with the amount of the power plant produces over its lifetime, and we could work out how much more, so what is the cost of the power plant to run it, to build it, and so on and so on, if you don't only look at the return that it will produce by selling the electricity, but also what it will cause in terms of carbon emissions liability. And the results are staggering. So staggering that I had to ask my two bank collaborators whether these were real. And they were as shocked as I was. Because what you see here are percent of percent, basis points. But we're talking here over the lifetime of of a coal-fired power plant, we're looking at 11,000, almost 12,000 basis points. That is 117% additional cost, which is huge. No bank will finance anything like this. What is the conclusion? That if you apply this research and the mathematics that I am not showing here to Eskom, which is the power utility monopoly in South Africa, that produces electricity, 84% of its electricity by burning coal, where the power plants are not equipped with carbon storage and capture, or carbon capture and storage, excuse me, you'll see that this firm is in a state of default. What it means is that Eskom has issued debt, as every other company does. And that debt, if you took into account the carbon liability that arises from the cost evolution over the next 25 years, according to the NGFS carbon prices, that business is just no longer viable, okay? And that is what it makes Eskom a stranded asset, because it will be very hard to convince anybody to take that business on, given that it is in a state of financial default. Now, of course, it's not the case in South Africa because Eskom is underwritten by the South African state, and so they keep running. But financially, if the carbon emissions are taken into account, they are just no longer financially viable. Why is this important? Why should the ILO listen to this? Why should we researchers make further efforts? Because we're talking here of a power supplier for a whole country. If there is no electricity, and trust me, when the lights go off for 12 hours a day, you have very little you can do, especially when it hits during the day and you're not sleeping. It has a very big impact. It has an impact on you actually organizing your day. You're going to be starting thinking when to charge your batteries and what you're going to be doing, when are you going to be having your calls. But it also affects the barber, it affects the little business that just needs a little tool that needs electricity and cannot be used because the power is off. So these analyses do actually have a huge impact, and the banking system is waking up to these. And waking up meaning that apart from AI, it's really taking a lot of their time, and they're putting huge resources because they recognize that this is a huge problem that needs to be used. And in terms of, is there a good outcome that can come from financial systems? I do think they can, but they only can if the measurements are properly made and the products are properly designed. So my invitation to you to think beyond ESG, especially when it then comes to S and G. Thank you very much.
Here from here, so maybe because it's good. Yeah,
Thank you
it was
for
not-
that. I just had a quick question, which was, how do you incorporate avoided emissions in these calculations? Does that help adjust? Do you adjust the price somehow for avoided emissions? And what is the calculation there?
Excellent question, but I'm afraid I didn't get it yet. Knowledge in my folder is most of the slide. Apologies. But the answer to your question would have been on this slide here, where we actually look exactly at not only the cost of paying when you, in terms of advance, or in terms of a certificate that you have to buy on the voluntary market, but also the cost if you decide to actually not avoid. That requires an investment in technology, or it requires a redesign of your business. Perhaps you're no longer going to produce your product, you're going to change line of business altogether. That is, of course, a cost, and it comes in exactly in that way there. So yes, in the bigger research and the bigger results that I'm not showing here, they will be included in terms of the money required for you to adopt a negative emission approach. So that is how you absorb or avoid. So that's what you can't do when you have this green label. Green is green, but you can't differentiate.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks for the nice talk. I have a question about this this carbon flow you were talking about. And I mean, I guess I understand it on an abstract point of view. But then in detail, I don't know, if you want to finance a power plant or a dam, I think most also depends on how you finance it.
Yes.
And that is something, if you have a process, you don't know. So whether you finance it via a loan that is taken from a certain industry. And I guess once you introduce this thing, then certain loans will be maybe more expensive. And so at the end, you don't know before building them what the carbon footprint is. And so how does it actually work in practice too?
So project finance, actually, you do know. You do know. So the data that I showed there for the power plant, is data that is available from the Agency of Energy and something else from the US Department. So that's available. But you have also prints for many other things, including, the impact. And I'm aware we're only focused on carbon emissions, right? When you build a dam, there are others. So that's where nature is. And people are talking about nature risk, and I'm still struggling understanding how to do the emissions. But concretely, it's funny that it's an abstract, show the mathematics. So if you come to me and say, I want to build this power plant, I want to build whatever, this steel factory, right? Also their emission. I need a loan. I need, I don't know, $1.5 billion to do it. And let's assume that I will give you a 100% loan. So in that instance, the power plant, as soon as we exchange a contract, the power plant doesn't find anything to 100%. Now, what I'm saying is, I shouldn't just take 100% of all the returns and costs to build it and so on. I should also bear the 100% liability in terms of carbon flows that project costs. And that then becomes very concrete, because it means that the financial product will not only determine how the payments, the cash payments are organized, but also what impact it will be on the carbon flows. So if you pay me back 50%, then 50% of that dam or that factory comes back to you, but then 50% of the carbon liability, the carbon flow, absorption and emission will also return. So as we say, carbon flows the money. Sorry, carbon follows the instead of being completely disregarded and become
I don't want to take too much time, but my question, I think you answered it very well. But what I found interesting is, so the upfront cost is maybe not clear. That's what I'm so if the government wants to fund a power plant, then it might at the end heavily depend on what kind of loan they can get.
So the upfront cost is known the moment you have decided what is the carbon price that will be assumed for the next 25 years. And that will be reflected in the interest rate that will be applied to the loan. Now, excellent question. Assuming whatever for the next 25 years carbon price solution, but that, of course, will change. And that's exactly where the risk comes in that needs to be modeled. And that's exactly where probability comes in that needs to be used instead of shying away because it's hard to understand. And that will then require a risk analysis that takes into account the sensitivity of the cost if the price of carbon over the next 25 years will grow at a lower rate or a higher rate, and so on. And this is what I would have shown you in another talk. On the slide here, we have red quantities. So sorry. Here. So that takes exactly into account the fact that the carbon price might not stay the same as it leaves today over the next 25 years. So we have now multiple scenarios. We are going to be associating probabilities to those scenarios, and that will give us an idea of what is the upfront cost subject to the confidence that the risk analysis will have to incorporate. Thank you for your excellent question. Yes.
Hi, I'm sorry, I have a background in economics and history, so talking to mathematicians, or you should. Talking to mathematicians sometimes can be tricky, but I feel like I have to challenge you. With political economy questions, because I think what you say, the good, the bad, and the ugly. However, my question is, the challenge here really, when we're talking about climate finance and climate change, is for me, above all, the political economy and what is entailed in terms of who is losing and who is winning. And so you're calculating, and the model is very clear and very beautifully done, but the distributional effects of the cost of the carbon emissions, which would be probably, well, who is paying for the additional cost. This is, and you are just embedding this and integrating this into a financial sector model,
Yes.
which has its own distributional inequalities. And so this is the element that I really think should be integrated in order that we don't just translate to the inequalities in the social side into the environmental side. So this is the challenge I would.
Absolutely. So I think this is exactly what we're trying to do. And I'll take the Eskom example. So Eskom is a company, it can be sold. If it defaults, meaning that investors are no longer going to pile money into Eskom, then the government will have to take over because they own the company. Now, what can the government do? They can use tax money to bail it out. Then everybody who pays tax in South Africa will pay it back, or everybody who has paid them. If the government doesn't want to do that because they're not going to be elected next time, then the government will have to hike electricity prices to make up for that down payment. If you do that, then for everybody who's already struggling to pay the kilowatt hour will be priced out altogether. And those who are just about to make it are going to lose their business. So the question here is really what redesign should be achieved in such a way that we understand who is going to take the brunt of their costs. If we want to decarbonize, because of course the premise here is if we want to decarbonize. If we don't want to decarbonize, well, then the carbon term sheet will just have an entry of 0, and then you're going to have business as usual. So I'm not here to judge who should price, but I think I can contribute in showing who will pay if things are not becoming transparent. If investors don't understand this from the outset. And then, as a last resort, it's always the government, or then it's going to be IMF, which then means that it's going to be a collection of countries that are going to take it. Somebody's going to take it. I'm interested in helping to show who it's going to.
Thank you. If you have further questions during the break. Thank you very much, Andrea. It's time for our second panel.